Dan, welcome to the show. Wonderful as always to see you. I haven't read your book, but let me take a guess. Because you and I are fellow thinkers, we think along the same lines. The fuse to this conflict now between America, its foreign legion called NATO, and Russia in Ukraine, the fuse was set in the Russiagate hoax that the Democrats set fizzing when Donald Trump was elected. Is that, roughly speaking, according with your point of view?
Yes, George. And first of all, thanks for having me again on your show. And that is exactly right. And that is exactly the thesis of my book, that in 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost the election, the Democrats and Hillary, unable to accept their own failings in the campaign, including calling their own working class base deplorables, decided to blame Russia. And of course, then some of the intelligence community, including the CIA and FBI, were happy to push that as well because they had their own reasons for doing so. They did not want Trump to have a rapprochement with Russia, which he was talking about openly in his campaign. And so this was really a goal of theirs to derail any chance of Trump doing that. And I think that was effective in that way. And I think that it is effective until this day of creating this incredible animus, not only towards the Russian government and Vladimir Putin, but also the Russian people, which you're seeing manifest now in ways that I've never seen, even after 9/11, when there was certainly anti-Muslim hysteria, but the anti-Russian hysteria now is just incredible. And as you put it so well, this was ignited in 2016 with the Russiagate scandal.
And yet that Russiagate scandal stands completely discredited. The inquiry, the Mueller inquiry and so on, it has been debunked, and yet people act as if it wasn't debunked.
Well, that's how these scandals work, George, of course. Allegations are made, although as one commentator said, I forgot who said it, but I think it was the best statement of the scandal. It was a scandal without any even allegations. Even if you believed what was said, it was pretty minimal that was being said about Russia's so-called interference in the elections. But, the way these things work is they throw enough mud at the wall, hoping some of it sticks. And while none of it stuck in terms of being factual, it's stuck in terms of the memory, particularly of the American people and particularly of Democrats, people in the Democratic base who have clung to this belief that somehow Russia derailed Hillary's campaign, that somehow they continue to interfere in U.S. elections, and that Putin is the greatest evil since Hitler. And that is how it's being portrayed. And again, I see this on my own social media pages. Most of my friends are Democrats, and again, the vitriol that's just being spilled towards Russia and again, Russian people is just amazing. Again, and particularly coming from liberals who were people who would generally eschew such things, but now they're the ones kind of raising this banner.
Yes, I mean, on one level it's inexplicable. The same thing exists here, but like everything else, much smaller than in America. Everything's bigger in America, including mass hysteria. But the irony is not just that everybody is the new Hitler. I mean, I'm so old, Dan, I can remember the prince of Arab politics, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the greatest Arab leader of all time. A man, precious, pristine, being called the Hitler on the Nile. So anybody can be the new Hitler. But the Americans don't seem to understand, and many Brits also, that Putin is not a communist, that Russia is not a communist country, that it poses, therefore, no existential threat to Western capitalism, that they could have been friends with Russia. They chose not to be. That's something I don't quite understand.
Well, that is the tragedy of all this, George, isn't it? That, and this Russia's view and Putin's view, and he said it recently, of course, in some of his speeches, that, look, after the Soviet Union collapsed, it was Russia's, they anticipated that they would be admitted back into the West, that they would be part of the community of nations, even maybe admitted into NATO. And instead, the door was slammed on their face, right? That never happened. We have to remember, after 9/11, Putin was the first world leader to call George W. Bush, offer him condolences, offer to help in the war on terror, gave that help, particularly in Afghanistan, where Russia still had assets. And again, the U.S. simply rejected Russia and Putin. And now that part of that was because Putin would not go along with the Iraq War in 2003, and that was seen as some sort of betrayal, right? But in any case, I think the Russians are shocked, and they're shocked really right now. They're shocked that, again, they never were welcomed back into the West, even though, again, communism was gone by the end of 1991. And now they're seeing that this isn't just about communism. It's not just about Russia. They're seeing the hatred towards the Russian people being exhibited. Piano players, chess players, opera singers being uninvited from events, being fired just because they're Russian. This is I don't remember this ever happening in any other circumstances. And why is this? I think there's a few reasons. I think one is that, and you pointed this out in the last hour, with all this money, the trillions of dollars that go to the defense industry, they have needed an enemy. And they need a big enemy. It can't just be little Iran or Venezuela. They needed Russia as the enemy, and they chose Russia as an enemy. Russia is a chosen enemy. It could have been a friend. They wanted this enemy. They got this enemy, and it will continue to line the coffers of these defense contractors. And I think that's a lot of what this is about. Russia, the hatred of Russia is in Americans' DNA, right? Because of the Cold War. And even once the Cold War ended, the powers that be in the military-industrial complex wanted to continue, the hatred towards that country, and it's worked.
It sounds like a great book, Dan. One last question, an unfortunate question, but needs to be asked. I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, neither are you. But I looked again at the presidential debate when Hunter Biden's laptop came up. And I don't even remember it from the election campaign. Maybe I missed it. But everything that Trump said about Hunter Biden and the Biden family's deep and unsavory involvement, unsavory to say the least, in Ukraine. Everything that Trump said was true, and everything that Biden said has turned out to be a lie. Biden's answer was, this is discredited. 51 American intelligence officers have described this as Russian disinformation. And Trump says, what, the laptop now is Russia? And Trump answers, yes, that's exactly what it is. Now the New York Times has admitted that the Hunter laptop from hell story was true. Trump was telling the truth. Imagine.
Yeah, no, and the interesting thing about Trump, so first of all, on that score, yes, he was telling the truth. And we actually know that the Western media, for the most part, made a concerted effort to conceal that truth during the campaign because they didn't want Trump. reelected. And so they went out of the way to poo-poo it again as either another QAnon type conspiracy or as you say, some sort of Russian disinformation. And so we never got the truth again until now. The New York Times, way after the fact, at a time when it couldn't do any political harm at the moment, admits, in fact, that the allegations were true. But, again, going back to Trump, the one interesting thing about him was that at times he told very difficult truths that people didn't want to accept. You might remember, for example, he said that the U.S. was supporting ISIS. Of course, that was true. He said that the U.S. was in Syria to take their oil, which was true. You might remember that Assad responded by saying Trump was the greatest president ever, not because of his policies, but because he was the first president who was at least honest about the U.S.'s true aims in countries like Syria. So, in that way, he was an interesting figure. Of course, he told his own lies when it was convenient. But he said some very important truths that were not listened to. And that's a shame.
You say that the New York Times have waited till no political damage could be done, but it might be done. I've been wondering why the New York Times has now told the truth about the cover-up of the Biden family's involvement in Ukraine. I'm wondering if somewhere deep in the deep, a conclusion has been reached that Joe has to go, that he doesn't cut the mustard, that the presidency will have to change hands. Is there any possibility I might be right?
Well, I think you certainly could be. I mean, I certainly think as an objective matter, Joe Biden is not firing on all cylinders. I think we can agree on that. He seems not in the best health in terms of his mental capacity. I think a lot of people see that. And to have a guy like that in charge at a time when, look, we could be, facing a world war, or at least facing the possibility of it, and need someone to get us out of it. It could be that the ruling elite have decided, as you say, that he is not the one. He certainly, I think, by 2020 will not be an appropriate candidate for president. And maybe they're laying that groundwork now to start figuring out who that person's going to be to take over the Democratic Party.
Doesn't sound like it's going to be Kamala. Thanks very much, Dan Kovalik.